Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Bad Batch, Season 2. In this video, it's a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of The Bad Batch, one season at a time. In this video, I will cover all the episodes of Season 2 of The Bad Batch. Now, The Bad Batch is a show I am not that huge on. I do enjoy it. I do think it's a good show, but it is the third animated show from creator Dave Filoni, the third Star Wars animated show after the Clone Wars and Rebels, not including all the mini-series and limited series. I enjoyed the Clone Wars and Rebels. I gotta be honest, Rebels was probably my favorite out of the animated ones so far. And I did the Clone Wars, had a lot of mediocrity, but got better towards the end of the show. And the Bad Batch I enjoy because it's a continuation of the Clone Wars pretty much. It's the sequel series, the successor to it, because this continues after the Clone Wars ends. In fact, I think the most interesting thing about this show is its setting at the time that it's set in. That's immediately following the end of the Clone Wars and the formation of the Empire, and thus we see the Empire in its infancy. Now, I do like that time setting. I think that was probably more interesting in Season 1 than it is now. But I'm actually, to be honest, the time frame I'm most interested in is the one post Return of the Jedi, the one the Mandalorian is in. Those are the politics and the political situations and the world building I'm most interested in, because that's the one we know least about. We pretty much know what's going to happen, like, between now and the A New Hope. We've had several shows to fill in the gap. There's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Andor also takes place before A New Hope, and so it feels like this time period is, and plus we pretty much know, it was implied what happens in between those two. So what happens in between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens to me is a lot more vague and a lot more open, and therefore I'm more interested to know more about that. But anywho, I still do find this time period interesting. Now, I already talked about in my Season 1 review how I felt like the characters of the show were pretty, like, formulaic for a cartoon. You have the muscle guy, the tech guy, the smart guy, the leader guy, and you have the little girl, which is common, and yeah, so each character in the Bad Batch is an archetype, which is why I didn't like them when they appeared in the Clone Wars. But I think the stories that they actually started telling with them in their own show, basically having to do with the time period it's set in, the formation of the Empire, is what made the show interesting, despite its flat characters. Now, Season 2, I think, does make these characters a lot more interesting. It does make you sort of develop them more, and they move past their archetypes, even though I think they're still kind of grounded in those archetypes and could never escape them. They do try to develop them a bit more beyond. But I guess, like, watching Season 2, which I did binge watch after the season had finished, purposely, intentionally, because I don't know, it's not one of those shows I like to watch week to week, because even though it is more episodic, and so it might make more sense to watch it week to week, I'm just not as interested in it, and there's some episodes that I just didn't really care for at all, and so it feels like if I would watch it week to week, I would feel like a week would be the waste of my time, and I was like, okay, so now I gotta wait another week, and I would just kind of lose interest. So it's just easier for me to just binge it all in one go, and then just like sit through the boring episodes to get to the good ones. Now, overall, I would say the show is mediocre. maybe that's not fair to say mediocre because that sounds a bit too negative. It's good. It's like averagely good, I think is what I would say. It's interesting enough for me to keep wanting to tune in year by year, but as I said, not interesting enough for me to want to watch it week to week. But yeah, and so I found this season was pretty much like a kid's show. It is a cartoon, and I think the audience is geared more towards the younger audience. There's a lot of perspective that the Clone Wars and Rebels were geared towards, particularly the Clone Wars, a more mature audience, like say 13, 14-year-olds rather than like 7, 8-year-olds. But I think there's some episodes of the Clone Wars that did seem geared towards 7, 8-year-olds. And then some that geared towards like 17, 19-year-olds. So it was kind of inconsistent. And the Bad Batch, I think I definitely see a similar thing happening where there's some episodes where I think the majority of the show is, geared towards that at least 13, 14. Of course, adults of all age could watch it, but from 13, 14 up, I should say. But there are some episodes that seem more focused on this younger audience, and here's what I would say about season 2 in particular is that it seemed like every episode, the Bad Batch got in trouble. They had the heist or they had a mission and they get in trouble and they had to do some action sequences to get out of it. And so it seemed kind of formulaic, which is why it gets a bit repetitive and why I think I might lose interest watching it week to week. But then, of course, there are other character moments that do stand out and test the time with the whole season. But overall, yeah, I wouldn't call it one of my favorite shows, and I would still say I liked Rebels better. But anyway, let me get into the episodes, starting with the first episode, Spoils of War, where the Bad Batch are going on a mission to discover, retrieve, I should say, Dooku's war chest, his many things wealth that he's accumulated over the Clone Wars, and now that he's dead, the Empire claiming it, and so the Bad Batch go to steal it. And again, this is your typical adventure. They go in, and a couple of the members of the Bad Batch get stuck in a container, and the other ones get hunted down by stormtroopers. Yada yada yada. It's pretty formulaic. So they had some interesting commentary about the spoils of war and about how Dooku got rich off of stealing from others and all the atrocities he committed, and so there was some commentary there, but for the most part it is action, Bad Batch goes and tries to fight bad guys to steal shit. So it was okay, is what I'm saying. So next episode is The Ruins of War, which continued directly after the previous episode where the Bad Batch are in trouble. I think it was Echo, Tech, and Omega got trapped in a container, and they end up seeking refuge with this old guy, and Omega gets obsessed with retrieving the Dooku's chest, his gems or whatever, from the container, which is about to fall off a cliff. And so this episode is a bit more interesting to me because it was the sort of message of how eventually, Tech and Omega, I think it was Echo, had to impart to Omega to sort of let it go. That even though they thought, because the thing is, they wanted to retrieve Dooku's wishes, or at least Hunter did, because his vision was to set them up for life, so they didn't have to keep running, they didn't have to keep doing these stupid odd jobs for Sid, that they could just go somewhere and settle, and that they would be set. And so this was kind of like their dream of not having to fight, not having to run anymore. And Omega was really chasing that dream, but she almost died in doing so, and Echo had to convince her that her life was not worth risking over that they would be fine without it. And so I do like that. I think that did make this episode a bit better. They had this other storyline with Hunter and Wrecker like being trapped and killing all these stormtroopers that I was less interested in, but yeah, so that was kind of an interesting moment. So this was this is an even better episode. So next episode was the Solitary Clone, and I like this one a bit better. This one follows Crosshairs. He goes on a mission with Commander Cody, which I had forgotten what happened to him because, to be honest, I got some of these clones from the Clone Wars mixed up because, well, they do all look alike. They're clones, as a fact. And so I never realized what happened to Cody. I thought he died at the end of Clone Wars Season 7, but I guess I was wrong because he's here. So they go on, Crosshairs goes on a mission. I found this very interesting because their mission was to subdue this world because this world was part of the separatist movement. And so when the Empire tried to claim it, she's like, well, no, because we separated from the Republic and the Republic came the Empire, and so we're not a part of your Empire, go away. And so Crosshair and Cody and all the stormtroopers are sent on this mission to sort of because she had abducted the Imperial who was supposed to be the governor. And so they go on this mission to stop her, and I was really confused as to who this episode wants me to root for, because it seemed like the way the music and the point of view and what we followed was wanting us to root for Crosshair and Cody, that wanting us to say, oh, let's watch them take her down. But I was actually rooting for the separatist because she was right. I kind of empathized with her more, that fuck this empire. I never agreed to be a part of it. And so I was really hoping that she would prevail. And in the end, she doesn't, because Crosshairs is too awesome. But Cody manages to talk her down from killing the governor, and he reasons with her and tries to really sympathize with her, and once the governor is free, he immediately orders Cody to execute her, showing how despicable they are and the Empire is. And Crosshair does it, but Cody doesn't. And so Cody apparently, and it's mentioned in the line of dialogue at the end of the episode, goes AWOL after this. So that's what I find most interesting about that Cody was sort of confronted exactly how despicable and despisable the Empire is, and that this caused him. So this was a very great episode, very dark episode actually, that really strikes a lot of moral questions, and so that's why I like it. That's why this sort of transcended like the cartoon action show that this show usually is, and made it something a bit more adult and a bit more complex. And so I did appreciate this episode a lot more. So next episode was Faster, which is a freaking race episode. Now typically I hate race episode. I hated the pod racing from the Phantom Menace. I hate any sci-fi shows that do these race episodes, like Star Trek Voyager did one, Stargate SG-1 did one, and I always rate them as some of the lowest. They're dumb. But I actually like this one a bit better than I typically do. I was surprised because it actually, first of all, that android guy that was the racer for Sid was funny. His arrogance was funny. I gotta admit that. And I actually thought this was an interesting character story for Tech, and how Tech managed to use his smarts and his reasoning to win the race and become a smart racer, and how people underestimated him because of it. And this is part of what is foreshadowing his death at the end of the season, because they sort of play him up and focus on him a bit more. But I liked it because of that, so I'm going to say this episode's okay. The character interactions and the humor elevates it from sucking to being okay. So, next episode was Entombed, and I gotta be completely honest with you. I was on my phone for the majority of this episode. This episode bored me. Maybe I would have found it more interesting if I was paying attention, but I couldn't pay attention because I thought it was boring and I was just playing games on my phone. Foremost, it's about like they go on this character that Wanda Sykes voiced, and I had to look this up. I was like, is that Wanda Sykes doing the voice for it? But yeah, she's doing a voice for this pirate type archaeologist. I guess it's a sort of like Indiana Jones type character who I guess they met through Sid, but she becomes friends with the Bad Batch, and they go on this grave robbing in archaeology Indiana Jones type adventure, and it was really boring. I can't really tell you much more about it because I wasn't paying attention. So that is all I'll say about that. So next episode was Tribe, and I did like this episode a lot. This dealt with the Wookiees. I believe this was the same Wookiee Padawan that we saw in the Clone Wars, and he apparently had survived Order 66, and the Bad Batch encounter him and take him back to his home planet and try to find a home for him. And there that they find these, lizard alien dudes who are in Star Wars lore. I recognize them as being one of the background characters in Return of the Jedi or Empire Strikes Back. But they've appeared in Clone Wars before, and I'm sure Star Wars fans know what they're called, but I'm not that familiar. But anyway, so they're like kind of with the Empire, like attacking Kashyyyk, and they talk about Wookiee pelts, which is actually kind of dark because the Wookiees are sentient, intelligent beings, and they're talking about getting their pelts like they would collect pelts from animals. So that's I don't know, that was really disturbing for me. But anyway, I liked this episode a lot. It dealt with the Wookiees, like in their connection with the trees. I think this is I think we've seen Kashyyyk before in Revenge of the Sith, but they only had like a really minor appearance, and so we didn't really get. And maybe we went there in the Clone Wars a couple of times. I don't remember, but I feel like this is the first time we really explore it. And having that Wookiee Jedi was very interesting as well. So I like this one. This one was interesting to me. Next one was the Clone Conspiracy. The first part in a two-parter, really. This episode does not at all feature the Bad Batch. Instead focuses on the character Senator, whom we saw in the Clone Wars, who was actually in one of my favorite episodes from Season 1 of the Clone Wars, and she appeared several times throughout the Clone Wars. It sounds like the actress was putting on a New Zealand, or no, it sounded like she was putting on a New Zealand accent, yeah. But I looked up and she's from Canada, so maybe she was just faking one. I still didn't quite understand that. I thought, Omega I think the actress is from Australia, because she definitely has an Australian accent. But trying to look up her name. But it was a good episode. It dealt with a clone who had witnessed the Senator Chuchi. That's her name. Yeah. So anyway, it dealt with a clone who had witnessed the destruction of Kamino, and how Senator Chuchi was trying to oppose this bill that the evil admiral was trying to basically get rid of the clones and put the stormtroopers in its place. And this is interesting. Seeing sort of the birth of the stormtroopers, because I remember a lot of people after seeing the prequels were kind of confused and thought that the stormtroopers were the clones, and they didn't understand, for example, in Force Awakens, why Finn, who's a stormtrooper, was not a clone, but other, people, Star Wars geeks who are more familiar with Star Wars corrected them. Was like, well, no, you see, the clones were actually replaced by, volunteer troops who became the stormtroopers in between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. And here we actually see how that happens, and it's very interesting. Very interesting getting into the politics of it. I do like this, and I do like the dark conspiracies, how there's an assassin. At first I was like, is that Crosshair? Who was like the sniper, but it wasn't Crosshair. I was like, why is it not Crosshair? And then the sniper dies at the end of the episode. I'm like, oh, that's why it's not Crosshair. Because they want someone expendable, which is, fair enough. But, it was a very dark, sort of foreboding episode, which leads into the second part, which was called Truth and Consequences. This does feature the Bad Batch, so this is when Senator Tucci brings in Rex, and Rex brings in the Bad Batch, and so the Bad Batch go on a mission to retrieve the evidence that Senator Tucci needs in order to prove that that Admiral Guy had committed atrocities on Kamino, and she does in fact accomplish this, and then Senator Palpatine pops up and like, oh, that Admiral is acting alone, he's a bad apple, and so I'm going to use this as an excuse to get rid of the clones and bring in the stormtroopers to do exactly what he wanted to do anyway. Now, I heard some people talking about this episode saying that this was Senator Palpatine, or not Senator, the Emperor Palpatine's plan all along was for Chuchi to uncover that evil Admiral Guy and expose him as committing the atrocities on Kamino, so that he could use that as an excuse to get rid of the clones and bring in the stormtroopers. But I disagree. I think this was his false save. I think he had all of his bases covered. Because first of all, I don't see how he could have been known that Tucci would have prevailed. Because she barely did, and how could he had known that the Bad Batch would be there to help her and retrieve the evidence. It was a long shot. So, I think, it wasn't like, I don't think that was his plan all along. I think his plan all along was to have the Admiral pass his bill in order to get this, the stormtroopers in place. But I think he had all his bases covered. I think he had his ass covered. He said, well, if that didn't happen, if the Admiral failed, then here's my fallback plan. I'm going to blame everything on him and use that as an excuse to bring in the stormtroopers, which is what he did, and which is why he's so insidious and so powerful, and actually, the boss level boss, like pretty impossible to beat. Like he has the whole game rigged, and that was Palpatine the entire time. And so that I found very fascinating, very very interesting to delve into this backstory of how the stormtroopers came to be. So I also really like that episode. So the next episode is The Crossing, where they go to this desert world to try to get this tunnel from gold from Sid or whatever, and it's they get caught in a storm or whatever, and Tech and Omega get separated, and they get some character building moments, I guess, but for the most part it was kind of boring. Didn't really care much for that episode. And the next one was called Retrieval, which is basically continues off of the previous one, because in the previous one they had their ship stolen by some kid, and so here they have to try to get their ship back. And this is the episode that felt really cartoonish to me. Like the kid who was like trying to work for this gangster, and he's like, I'm going to be top earner, and there's other kids there who get it even though they don't deserve to get it, and he's still deluding himself that he's going to be top earner, and then eventually the Bad Batch reveal him to be that he was scamming them all along, so the kids team up and overthrow him. was okay. It was I just found that punk kid who stole the thing too irritating of a character, and most of these characters were too irritating. I mean, it's kind of an interesting commentary on how workers are exploited, but still, for the most part, I did find it very typical, very cliche, and very cartoonish, so I wasn't a huge fan of that one. Next one is called Metamorphosis. This one I was also kind of meh on. Sid sent them to investigate this derelict ship, and that there's this signs of a monster on board. So it was like a very stereotypical horror, thing where there was a monster on a spaceship and there's signs of claw marks, and eventually we see the monster and they run for it, and it turns out to be the Xylo Beast that appeared in a couple episodes of the Clone Wars, and a couple episodes I did not like. And nothing really happened. Like, the Empire came, stole the Xylo Beast, took it away, and pretty much imprisoned all the village people who witnessed the Xylo Beast, so no one else could know this. It seemed kind of pointless, really, but it was okay, I guess. So, next episode after that was The Outpost. This was a really interesting episode that, again, another one that followed Crosshair, where he was ordered by this asshole admiral to go on this mission, and the clones there, the admirals being an obvious asshole dickhead too, and sent him on this mission to die, and they nearly die, and they barely make it out alive, and the admiral's a dickhead and orders his men to leave the guy to die, so Crosshairs just shoots him in the fucking face. And I think the majority of the episode earned the trauma that these guys went through to only lead back into to this admiral. It reminded me a lot of that, I can't remember his name, but the Jedi guy who hated clones and tried to kill them all in season 4 of the Clone Wars. It reminded me a lot of him. It was pretty awesome. I thought it was a pretty powerful episode. So next episode was Pabu, I believe it's called, where Wanda Sykes' character takes the Bad Batch to this paradise home where it's like a nice place to live. It's really hidden, extremely remote, and off the grid, and sort of suggests that they stop hanging out with Sid. And actually, the Bad Batch, I think previous to this episode, after the incident with the Xylo Beast, had decided to cut ties with Sid because they had had enough of her bullshit, which I think made total sense because Sid was kind of not giving them that much money and kind of screwing them the whole time, and that they were showing her loyalty that she didn't quite deserve. And so they go away with the Indiana Jones type character over to this paradise world, and everyone gets along. They meet the folks, and Omega makes a friend, but they have to have this earthquake tsunami storyline because we need to have some sort of threat in an episode. We can't have an episode without a threat, now can we? And I was sort of on the edge of my seat, and it was suspenseful, the whole storyline, but in the back of my mind the whole time I was thinking, well, this is contrived. They just need to have some sort of threat, so let's just have an earthquake and a tsunami. But overall, I still liked it. It was still a decent episode. I like the idea of this Pabu place and the appeal of just settling down and getting away from it all. Okay, and then the next episode is Tipping Point, which is kind of the setup for the 2-part finale. Feels kind of like an incomplete episode. It's like it's just setting up. It's setting up that evil Genesis doctor guy who we did meet him in previous episodes, but it sort of establishes him more as torturing Crosshair and trying to find Omega so he can get the Dr. Royce Hemlock. Is that the evil guy? He's voiced by Jimmy Simpson. Oh, I didn't know that. He's also voiced the evil guy on Prodigy. But anyway, so it's just basically him, threatening Omega, and Omega Not Omega, Crosshairs, and Crosshairs tries to warn the Bad Batch, but it actually ends up having the opposite effect because the Bad Batch want to go on a mission to save him, and then Echo returns to help them accomplish this. Good episode, but it's basically just a setup episode. So next we'll get into the 2-part finale, starting with the first part, The Summit, which was a really good episode, which had a summit where evil guy, what did I say his name was, Hemlock, and Tarkin are at this, summit where all the evil Empire guys go to try to plot the beginning of the Empire. We see, God, what the hell is his name? The dude who was in Rogue One, who is seen as being in charge of the Death Star, which they say the code word, or Krennic, Orson Krennic, that's his name. They say the code word for the Stardust, but we know that's the Death Star from Rogue One. So that's an interesting tie-in. And it's basically saying, well, where should the Empire devote its resources, its funds to? Should it be these clones, or should it be the Death Star, or should it be this, other thing? That's interesting, and I do wonder what they're getting at with these clones, because they keep hinting at, like Hemlock keeps hinting of Palpatine's plan, that this would greatly benefit him, to this cloning technology. Are they trying to hint at the Palpatine becoming a clone in the sequel trilogy? Because I feel like it's too early, but they could have started this early, I suppose, but this is something that The Mandalorian is dealing with now, and I think that makes more sense because that's deals with the timeline immediately after Palpatine's death. But I suppose they would have had plans in motion before his death in order to be able to pull off this clone perfectly. Or maybe not. They could have Jurassic Parked it. I don't know. Maybe this has nothing to do with that. And maybe it has something. I heard another theory that Hemlock was trying to genetically engineer the masses of the population to be devoted to the Empire. So he's definitely shown as an evil dude. So anyway, the Bad Batch try to sneak in to plant a tracking device on his ship so they can follow him back to his lair and rescue Crosshair. But this mission goes awry as soon as we see other stormtroopers there who are not stormtroopers, who are setting bombs. I'm like, Saw Gerrera, it's Saw Gerrera. And then he takes off his mask or his helmet, and sure enough, Saw Gerrera. I think that was kind of obvious, but they always have to bring in Saw Gerrera. He's always the typical asshole rebel guy who wants to kill everyone and fucks up our hero's plans because he's too kill crazy. So I kind of knew it would be him because of that, and that's exactly what he does. He doesn't, in fact, of course, he doesn't succeed in killing Tarkin and Krennic because they have to be alive to be in the movies they're in later on. So he fails, but he manages to fuck up the Bad Batch's mission so bad, and we get this sequence when they're having to run away. So it was an intense episode, one that I really liked. So next we will get into the season finale, which is Plan 99, which carries on directly off of, so it's the second part, it carries on directly off the previous episode where the Bad Batch are trapped on this above ground rail, and they're stuck, and Tech has to go out to try to get it working again. And it's a very intense sequence, and eventually Tech isn't able to make it, and he has to sacrifice himself in order to save the others, which was a hugely emotional moment. Now, it wasn't in tears emotionally wise, because I do think, yes, the season was definitely developing this character more because they knew they were going to kill him off at the end of the season. But I still feel like he is kind of a cliche character. Even though they did develop him more, he's a more developed cliche character. And so I did think it was sad, don't get me wrong. I still thought it was tragic, and of course the whole sacrificing himself to save the others was really touching, but I wasn't completely broken up by it, if you know what I'm saying. And I'm starting to wonder if he is actually going to stay dead. I do think, in my mind, I think it's a very strong possibility that they are going to bring him back in a future season and say, oh, he actually survived. I think a common thing they could do is have that Hemlock and his minions, how, he threw them the goggles at the end of the episode, and maybe they found his body and they were able to use their genetic bullshit to save his life. And bring him back to life and turn him evil or whatever and torture him and make them the evil tech. I could see them definitely doing that. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he'll stay dead. But I don't know. Somehow I kind of doubt that. But that's not where the tragedy ends. They manage to get out alive and they go back to Sid's place to heal because Omega got seriously injured in the crash, but apparently that was a huge mistake, as was foreshadowed for most of the season, that Sid is not to be trusted, and Sid had threatened to turn them in, and apparently things came to a head where it benefited her and she only looks out for her, which is why they should not have gone back to her. But of course we needed to get the return of that awesome android AZ and get him away from her. But anyway, it didn't turn out so well for them, so they got captured, and Hunter tried to convince Omega to run to the ship and find Echo, but she did not listen and tried instead to rescue Hunter, and Wrecker instead just got captured herself. And ironically, where Hunter, Echo, and Wrecker managed to escape, Omega was the only one who actually did get captured because she was the main one that Hemlock wanted anyway. And so this is setting us up for it was quite a big cliffhanger, setting us up for next season, which I don't know how long they're going to stay with the storyline where Omega is captured and Hunter and the others have to try to get her back. Now, I think they could prolong the storyline quite long. I hope not the whole season. I think it might get boring. But they implied at the end where Hunter's like, where they're saying they have absolutely no idea where they are, and Hunter's like, we'll find them. So I can see it taking a really long time of them searching for her. And meanwhile, we'll get scenes with Omega with Crosshair and this other character who happens to be Omega's sister, at least that's how she tells herself, saying that she's actually the sister of Omega, so that she's another clone. So what exactly does that mean? What are the implications of that? This is something that the next season is going to explore more as well. But overall, really liked this episode. I thought it was extremely powerful and really did have me engaged. So that is it. Those are all of the episodes of Season 2 of The Bad Batch. So as always, I will give my favorite and least favorite episode of the season. Starting with my least favorite episode. Yeah, I didn't like the racing one that much, but it was better than I thought. The Metamorphosis one with the Xylo Beast I thought was kind of a waste of time. But my least favorite episode's got to be Entombed, the one where I wasn't really paying attention to because I was so bored. And they were just off like on this archaeology adventure, tomb robbing adventure, whatever. It just seemed boring. As for my favorite episode of the season, there were some really good ones, like the Solitary Clone had some really great moral dilemmas. The Clone Conspiracy and Truth and Consequences, which was a great political thriller. You had the Outpost, which dealt with Crosshairs killing that asshole admiral, which was really powerful as well. And then the Summit, which also was a really exciting episode. But for my favorite episode, I'm going to have to go with Plan 99, the finale, because that was a damn powerful finale with with Tech's death and Omega's capture and Sid finally betraying them. It was just a roller coaster ride of an episode and an extremely powerful one, and it does have me really psyched for season 3. So that is it for my review of Star Wars The Bad Batch Season 2. So now I will give my rating out of 10 on the season as a whole. And so my rating for The Bad Batch Season 2 as a whole is a 7. Very good. It was decent. It was a good season. Not great. And there were some boring episodes, but nothing too terrible, to be honest, and nothing too great either. Most of the episodes stayed in that 7 to 8 range, which is fine. Or 6 to 7, or 6 to 8, I should say. So there, the episodes were fine. As I said, it was a bit formulaic at times, where the Bad Batch goes on a mission, they go on an adventure, and they get some action. But there were great character moments in between those that made this season watchable. So that is it for my review of Star Wars The Bad Batch Season 2. Whenever Season 3 airs, who knows when that will be. I shall be back to cover Season 3 of The Bad Batch. In the meantime, you can check out my channel as I review many other shows, mainly covering Star Trek Picard week to week, and also Star Trek the original series, going back and covering every episode of that. And I will also be covering Star Wars The Mandalorian Season 3 when that ends. I will have my review out for that as well. So be sure to check out my channel so you can keep up with all of that, and be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.